my name is Tara Bentley, and I'm the Executive Director for the Indiana Association of Home Educators, otherwise known as the IAHE.
And my name is Courtney Nalen. I am a homeschooling mom of two who also works full-time outside of my home and a volunteer with the IAHE.
Together, we're your co-hosts for Season 2 of the Homeschool Indiana podcast. We'll be here each week sharing information to help you homeschool, keep you updated on what you need to know, and have some fun along the way. So let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Homeschool Indiana podcast. I am very excited to welcome to the podcast a dear friend of mine. And I have to say welcome back because she was actually on our first edition of the podcast. It is Linda Lacour Hobar. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you. So good to see you, Tara.
Oh, it is so good to see you. So I'm just going to share. We don't see each other as often as I would like because you moved south, but 19 years. We've been friends for 19 years.
Really? You did the math? Well, I'm not a math girl, so okay, but that sounds about right. Yeah, because early days of the mystery of history, I met you very early on.
You did. And I was using your curriculum in my house when you only had, I think you still only had one, the first edition.
Yeah.
First one. And
the truly ancient one now.
The truly ancient one. And I had the privilege of you put out a cry for help to work your booth for the mystery of history at our Indianapolis convention. And I got to hang out with you and seen all 4 of your editions come out and then come out again in a most beautiful format. And so I'm so excited to tell everybody about you and about the mystery of history. And you're coming back to Indiana.
Yes. It's just been too long. So
it has been. Now, we did have a pandemic in between and, a few years, but there's that. So we're going to start, and I'm just going to tell everybody the mystery of history is an award-winning world history curriculum written from a biblical worldview to guide students through a meaningful, engaging, and historically accurate journey from ancient times to modern. And I'm glad I had that in front of me so I could read it because I wouldn't be able to say it quite so well.
That's all right. Sure.
But I know I've heard the story of how you got started, how you were called to do this. And I just would love to have you share that with everybody, what inspired you to write this with biblical worldview and secular history woven together.
Well, if I was perfectly honest, to some degree, it was the result of a midlife crisis. I literally was turning 40. Now, this was many years ago. And I was at a crossroads because my kids were getting, a little older. I saw a little light at the end of the tunnel. I was homeschooling for like 17 years. And there was a tug towards something. And so I committed myself at age 40 to praying for about a year about, Lord, what is next? Because I truly felt there was just a stirring in my soul, and I had a wide variety of interests, so I wasn't quite sure where that was going to land. But one of those many interests, of course, was homeschooling. At that time, I had been homeschooling 10 years. And this was, I started way back in the late 1980s. So I was all of a sudden considered a veteran. Mm-hmm. And I also had an interest in history because I fell in love with it in college. But what really happened is after this time of prayer and also hosting some sessions here and there at homeschool groups, and telling them what I was looking for in this curriculum or that curriculum, there came a day I was literally cutting vegetables on this little island in my kitchen, and I felt as if the Lord whispered to me the mystery of history. I kid you not, and I to this day credit the Lord with the fact that it rhymes. Like, how cool is that? Because I was not sitting around thinking, what would I name a history program? But to me, that was the calling, because I immediately knew that the mystery was the gospel. My husband and I are former missionaries. I got saved when I was 17, so I'm passionate about telling people of Christ. And then history was a love, and I was trying to teach it to my kids, but at that point I was just grabbing this and that and sort of putting my own stuff together anyway. So when I heard the mystery of history, I thought, well, there's that thing. I mean, literally, this might be it. And I went downstairs. I stopped chopping vegetables. I went downstairs to this very old computer we had, and I booted it up, and I wrote the dedication page to my kids that is still in volume 1, like to this day. I've retained that page. I think I added grandchildren to the dedication page, but it was to my kids. And it just means a lot to me that I have that page because as I've questioned myself over the years, feeling so many times inadequate, I just have gone back to feeling like God prompted me to do this, not only for my kids, but for others. And a quick funny story, not funny, but I'm like so many other people, I grew up not liking history. It was so boring. I literally slept through classes. I mean, literally, I was that girl that was asleep. But when I went to college, there was two professors who proceeded to just tell stories. They didn't even have notes. And I was amazed because they were telling stories about people. And it clicked that history is about people. And I'm a people person. I love that side of it. And that ignited a love in me that has lasted to this day. I still don't get too excited about treaties or events, but give me the story of the person behind it. Give me the story. Give me a little of their everyday life. What were they like as a kid? And it's transformative, I truly believe, because there's always something to learn through the lives of people, particularly how they do react toward God or not toward God. There's just messages there. So anyway, that's kind of how it started.
Oh, I love it. And I've always, obviously loved your curriculum before I knew you. Loved it even more now that I do know you and to see it. And it has always been one of my top recommendations for homeschool families. We have a niece who decided to homeschool her daughter. And obviously, I recommended The Mystery of History with some others, which I won't get into. Not history. You're the only history recommendation. It was so fun. We went to visit her last year and she wanted to show me the timeline that her daughter was making.
Oh.
And so I've got the photo of me next to her with her timeline. And it takes me back to bringing my youngest daughter to meet you at a conference and taking with you.
And I have her timeline to this day. Do you remember she made me a sample notebook timeline?
Yes.
And there's a picture of her and I in the book. And at that time, she was a little shorter than me, but that didn't last very long. And I know she would tower over me now. But yes, that is so sweet because I literally, she built a timeline just for me.
And I love the timeline. I love being able to see the history like that and see the stories line up. And what we would do when we were doing, we put ourselves at the end of the timeline, right? Like, I love the notebook. So here's where you fall in history. Right. Now let's go back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So your curriculum is known for its chronological approach to world history. What advantages do you see to teaching history?
Let me count the ways. So first, I think to acknowledge the advantages, it's good to look at the disadvantages. So let's look at the three problems that most of us bring into this to begin with, which is first, so many of us grew up getting just bits and pieces of history, not taught in order. And so obviously, when it's a smattering of this here and that there, you are lacking context and you're lacking cause and effect. So that's just one problem, not to mention that a lot of those books were boring and put us to sleep. But second, seldom, if ever, do we see sacred and secular history woven together. It's just not the design of most classrooms. And what I mean by that is when you think history, like Alexander the Great or Cleopatra, you picture typically a classroom, be it elementary, high school, or college, right? Your Western Civ class. And when you think Bible history, that is maybe Sunday school or perhaps vacation Bible school, right? And that's where you learn about Daniel or, Isaiah. But those worlds just weren't blended. So that's one of our challenges. Then third challenge, you know me, Tara. First, some of us didn't get history at all growing up or just snippets of it thanks to the Marxist philosophies that crept into school, probably starting back in the 90s. That was under John Dewey. That's a whole nother topic. And I sincerely believe that there was an agenda put in place so that the average student wouldn't see the big picture of history. Because you know what the big picture does? I think the big picture screams a love for freedom and liberty. That's what happens when we look at the big picture. But modern day tyrants, well, they don't want us to see that big picture or to desire that big picture. So we were dumbed down. They're still trying. Now, let's go flip. Let's go positive. Let's then go to the advantages of this chronological approach. Well, again, one of the things is you will see cause and effect. And of course, I have to give you a history example. So if you learn about the fall of the Roman Empire when it lands on the timeline around 476 AD, well, you then can more clearly see why man fell into the Dark Ages. Like literally, as these Roman soldiers were just disposed of, right? I don't know where they all went, but they're gone. They were the ones who held the law and order of the land. The Roman Empire has collapsed. Who picks it up and what do they do? Well, it's medieval times. So the knights in shining armor literally become the new law and order guys. So the whole feudalism system takes off. But you have to understand the fall of the Roman Empire to understand the Middle Ages. Workshop drop, but I am going to be giving at the convention a workshop called The Rise and Fall of Rome and Why It Matters, because it really does matter. There's so many great lessons out of that. So another advantage to teaching everything in order is that you can, again, integrate that secular and sacred if you desire. And I think most Christians do want to see, God's word totally woven in. We do call that a biblical worldview, but even just chronologically, the dates of the people. And I do have a favorite example. My all-time favorite is the story of Cleopatra. Now, I cannot give her whole story here, but she actually intersects with the Christmas story. And it's easy to miss unless you kind of do some digging. But here's the deal, the connection. When she was in the Battle of Actium near the end of her life, she was defeated by a man in the Second Triumvirate who was named Octavian. Okay, so she loses the Battle of Actium. It does lead to an early suicide, which is quite tragic. But what happens is because Octavian will defeat her and Mark Antony, he will declare himself the first emperor of Rome. And when he does, he's going to give himself a new name. He's going to call himself Caesar Augustus, meaning that he is the one who, about 20 years into his reign, he runs a census to count his people, which is exactly why Mary and Joseph had to saddle up and make their way to Bethlehem to fulfill the census, the decree by Caesar Augustus, who was Octavian, who defeated Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. I mean, it all goes together because there was fulfillment of prophecy in that. Micah 5:2 said that the Christ child would be born in Bethlehem. And God, in his mysterious way, will use even the life of the litter of Cleopatra to even just eventually let this all play out in fulfillment. So it's a marvelous story and one that you get if you'll line up Bible and world. So I do have a third thing, though, on advantages to chronological. I do believe that will whet our appetite for freedom, kind of as I already alluded to. But let's particularly look at American history. You will see it in a whole new light when you realize how unique it is because it threw off centuries of tyranny that had just been known since nearly the beginning of time. There had been royalty in place for, be it an emperor or what have you, but there were bloodlines that dictated really who was in charge. And then a battle here and a battle there as we would overthrow, different kings and queens. But bloodlines had a lot to do with who was in charge until American history, when we literally threw off the shackles of the British and would elect a president who would actually resign for a peaceful power of transition. I mean, it's that overthrow of a monarchy that really was American exceptionalism. Now, sometimes that word makes me uncomfortable because I think it means we're all haughty, and that's not it. We are a people that embrace freedom in a way that just generationally hadn't been. That's just not what our world was about. So anyway, I think that chronological history really points to, you pull out a timeline and look at everybody for all those centuries, how they were ruling, and then land on American, you'll never quite be the same. We go from really the bloodline to the ballot box. Wow. Just did recently. How extraordinary was that? Absolutely. And I will say, of course, the Greeks and the Romans toyed around with it, but they lacked the check and balance system that we have. And another workshop title drop, I do have a workshop called, for you guys, The Bad Boys of the 20th Century, that is going to show at least some of the tyranny that's been, still after all of us.
Well, I know people who know you and have followed and used the mystery of history. I know the question that you always get. And some people might be wondering, you're talking about world history, you've written world history, but Linda Hobar's talking about American history. I just heard it on this podcast.
You gonna make me spill that now?
It seems appropriate.
Well, I told you I would. So yes, newsflash, I am writing an American history curriculum. It will be the Mystery of American History. To be really honest, it's like the 5th volume in our series, although it will be a standalone. It can go in between, before, after, during any of the rest of our world history books. I'm only hesitant to announce it in that it will take me years to complete. So I'm not ready to hear from anybody about when's that going to be out, because really it will take me years to do it properly, for the thorough research. American history is difficult, but I have so far survived the American Revolution and the Civil War. So I just finished a lesson yesterday on Thomas Edison. So I'm making my way through. But anyway, yes, I am doing that. And it'll be like my other books as far as for all ages with a biblical worldview. It may gear a little bit more toward your older school kids, but there'll be stuff for the little ones. And it'll be a 1 or 2 year, just depending on the age kids.
I think that's perfect, because this was the other thing I want to talk about, is that how your program is for multi-ages. And so my story, right? So my girls are 7 years apart. And when you jump into homeschooling and you're teaching children who are 7 years apart, there's not a lot of things that you get to do together. And so when we found the Mystery of History, that was one of my favorite things. Here was a subject, here was a curriculum that we could do together. And they could have their own activities, but we were at least having the same conversations. And so I love that. So how do you balance having material for younger students all the way up through high school students?
First, a clarification. Generally speaking, all of our subjects fall into one of 2 categories. They're either stair step, which means they're skill oriented, where you have to master something before you can advance, or living subjects, which really are open ended and you don't have to master anything. You can just learn for the love of learning. And I like to call those sofa subjects, because that means without grade level and mastery, that we could just snuggle together on the sofa and read. And so that's true for, say, Bible, some of your early science work, and definitely history. Those are all sofa subjects where you can pull everybody together. But at the same time, there's some acknowledgement about what's happening to these little minds at different ages. So younger ones, they're not connecting dots. They're just getting new stories for the first time. And so what we do with them is just tap into their senses. So those guys get to, burn things, dye things, eat things, make things, build things, destroy things. They just get to use their hands. And what I hope they're doing is attaching a little memory to something, so that when they're older, they'll be like, oh yeah, I remember that time I blah, blah, blah. So of course I have an example for every volume to get, those people thinking, but really there's some fun ones. Like in volume 1, at one point we learned about the Phoenicians. Doesn't sound super exciting, but you know what they did? One of many things is they had an extraordinary dye that they created that gave us a purple color, and it was from a murex snail. It smelled awful. It was a horrible industry to be in, because they basically, killed the snails and let them air out on the beach. It was a real stinky process, but out of it, they got this rich purple dye, and that helped them trade around the world and stuff. So anyway, the kids get to basically make a real stinky little tonic and then dip a little cloth in it, just something. But, they'll remember that awful smell and stuff like that. I think we put a bunch of garlic in it or whatever we could. Another one for volume 2, one of the challenging themes of Middle Ages is that it was a complete power struggle between the authorities of the day. You had Roman emperors and you had the Pope. So you had church versus state truly clashing, like who's in charge here? So the little kids, they can't begin to get all the layers of what that means, but they can play tug of war. That's all that they're going to do in the backyard that day till they're older and can, understand more. For volume 3, when we study the Renaissance Reformation, one of the activities for the little guys is to just tape some butcher paper underneath the kitchen table, let them lay on their backs or on a chair under the table and just draw to remember Michelangelo painting that Sistine Chapel ceiling, which was quite painful, with his arms stretched over him. And for volume 4, on a far more serious note, we know history is morbid and we are sometimes concerned about studying things like the Holocaust. But even some of the worst stories in history, we can use it to open their hearts and talk about real life things. And so what I would do with little ones studying the Holocaust is not hover very much on the gore. They may not even hear the whole lesson out of the book. That might be something their older siblings reading, but they can still know that there were some bad people that hurt the Jews, and they can focus on the value of life. They can focus on heroism. And all they get to do that day is find a little corner in their house where they could try to hide someone and still sneak them food. Like, what would that have to look like? So just make them a little hero for the day. So that's how I think you handle little ones, is tap into their senses, where, of course, the next level adds a little layer of paperwork and has to write a paragraph. And then the older one is actually perhaps researching or expanding. And if people don't know this yet, one of the survival skills of home education are these SOFA subjects, where you do pull the kids together for as many subjects as possible and do them all together. You are building memories. Sure, they're poking each other on the sofa while you're reading, and there's that. But like that with my kids. What is it about boys? They poke so much. I had a poker. My son is in his 30s, and if he comes to visit me, he still will sneak up and poke me in the ribs in the kitchen just to remind me of our homeschool days. Anyway, I'm drifting, but yeah, that's my 2 cents on the age appropriate. There's a way.
I don't think I've heard it referred to that way. I don't think I've heard you refer to it that way. I may have missed it, but SOFA subjects. I love that idea. When you're first getting started, it can be hard to make that transition. So because my daughter was in public school through 6th grade, she had routines that she was used to, and what we thought school should look like. And so I love that phrase. And I think it's probably one of the biggest things that new homeschool mamas need to hear.
It's a paradigm shift from what we're used to about grade level material. Not that there's not a place for that, but that's for stair-step subjects.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. So if you do have students who you want to help make history come alive and who are intimidated by dates and historical facts, what advice might you have for those families?
Let's see. Well, again, you may not be able to do this with all subjects, but with the living ones and with world history, one way you could view it is pretend you're walking through a buffet line. Maybe you're at a cafeteria and you're overseeing your small child who has a tray. And of course, they want to grab all the things. And so you give a little supervision there. But the most important thing that child puts on his plate that day is the history story. Be it that you read it together or you listen to it by an audiobook, which we have, that's their entree. That's their main dish. Everything after that is really a side dish. There are so many things we offer, but you have to think wisely for your family. How many side dishes can we handle today? And some days, it's not a single other thing. In fact, you may, on one of those days, just listen to a lesson in the car and you're done. There is no other, because again, you're trying to survive and you've got lots of kids and lots of subjects. So as long as everybody gets the main dish, you're doing pretty good. Now, on a good day, you add a side or two, like maybe you add a coloring page or you're reading a historical fiction on the side. Or on a better day, when you got a little more appetite, you could add, oh goodness, you actually do one of those activities I suggested. Perhaps you give them a mapping exercise. And then once in a while, look at your subject as a feast. When for whatever reason, I don't know, all the clouds have aligned properly, you can feast and you can top to bottom just sprawl out and do the big thing. And literally, maybe that is a Renaissance feast or a medieval feast. You only do it once and you just pull out everything. But our approach to education is a lot like feeding our children. We know there's some days our kids are lucky for us to even drive through fast food and throw in the back seat, right? I mean, that's just real life. We know on a good day, there's a home cooked meal at home. But then we know once in a great while, it's a holiday and there's a whole feast. But not every day, because you just can't, right? So I just like to look at teaching as similar to how we feed our families. We don't want to give them junk food all the time. Just once in a great while out of necessity.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think that it's a paradigm shift, because most of us don't love history because of the way we were taught history. And that was probably, wait, I'm going to date myself, right? A Scantron sheet with a little bubble, and it was all dates, and so that is really how we were taught. Most of us were taught to evaluate history. It's like, could you remember the date?
Yeah. And I still struggle with that, to be quite honest. I really rely on a timeline to help me out.
I love the timeline. That's one of the things I love. And I don't really study history that much anymore unless it's in the genealogy space, which I think is kind of the same thing, right?
Very much.
So, well, let's jump forward. And I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this because you have studied both biblical and secular history extensively. Wow, what an interesting time to be having this conversation, because how does that impact how you view current events? You're giving a talk at our conference on the threat of socialism. But, here we are. We don't know. I mean, podcasts live forever, so people may be listening to this much later, but we are recording at the very end of January in 2025. And so give me your thoughts. We have lived through some interesting years, and you have to have a very unique perspective on all of it.
We have. Well, I'll tell you, the first thing that comes to my mind is that the Bible explains man's fallenness and sin. It calls it out. It offers a plan for redemption and reconciliation, right? The world doesn't. I mean, period. The world doesn't call sin sin. That is one of the biggest things I have seen change in my lifetime, is right and wrong have never been more blurry than I think they are in current times. Romans 3:23 tells us all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, which means that we cannot fix ourselves. They tried through the age of reason. Oh, we'll just reason through trying to understand life. Then they tried through the Enlightenment. Oh, we'll just be kinder. We'll be enlightened, and then we're going to solve all of mankind's problems. So today's headlines, today's theories, it's all a form of Marxism. And I would say we were barreling toward that until a little recently. We might have a reprieve with a new administration that is far more conservative, at least politically. But ultimately, the worldview, it's built on this false premise that man can self-correct. Karl Marx was an atheist. He taught it. He believed it. His idea to improve the world was to eliminate the upper class. That's the bourgeoisie. That's the property owner, the capitalist. He thought, we'll just get rid of greed by eliminating a layer and a tier in the social structure. Well, it doesn't work. It's not true, because greed is a part of the fall. So the accumulation of wealth or the lack thereof, it's like, that's just man having to deal with his heart issues. So anyway, we can't solve man's problems by class warfare. And that's what Karl Marx proposed. But I just feel like we are seeing Marxism hiding in plain sight just about everywhere. It's crept through all the weird and warped theories. It's what divides families, literally. So yeah, my workshop on the threat of socialism is pretty loaded. And what I'd like my listeners to know is that I will literally start at the Garden of Eden and trace Marxism up to modern times, and just where we see, even though Karl Marx doesn't jump on the timeline until the 1800s, but man in his own arrogance has been trying to solve his own problems for a really long time. The reason I start with Adam and Eve is that they literally second guessed God's governance when he gave them one law to follow, one little thing: don't eat of that tree. And they did. So our headlines are a reflection of centuries of thought, always will be. God alone knows where he's headed with all of it. I'm grateful to be alive at this time. I'm grateful for this reprieve I think we have in some of the headlines. But, this new administration just started. There's a long way to go. So, yeah, these are fascinating times. And I just pray that I will use the time wisely. God has given me freedom. I was born in freedom. I'm still in freedom. I think I'll be in freedom at least the next few years. But we know at any given time that can change. I'm not an alarmist. I'm a realist. You just have to study history to see that freedom comes and goes. We are experiencing now, so let's use it and use it wisely, because it might not be that way in the next generation. Freedom's an anomaly in history. It really is. So as long as God lets us have it, man, let's go for it. I mean, passionately, what can we do because we have that? Not to mention the amount of luxury. I've never known a day without a roof over my head or without access to food. But that's not how most of our world lives. So what am I doing with that? And I'm not saying that to shame anybody. I'm saying that to inspire people, like the freedom to teach at home. We know we have it now. It's been fought for. I hope people know the history of the movement and know that you and I have friends literally who were arrested for trying to home educate.
Right.
Well, every state I homeschooled in, it was free to do so at that time. So I never had to fight the law to do it. But I know people personally who have, as do you. And so, yeah, again, we're in a season. Let's go for it. Let's use it well. Let's protect it. Let's support states like yours going through, legal issues.
Yeah, and it's a very powerful reminder. Before we were recording, I was giving you a little update on legislatively what we're facing here, and we won't get into that, but just to say that freedom should never be taken for granted. This is a very unique time, and while we may feel like there's progress on some areas, it doesn't mean that the enemy is going to allow that to go forward unfettered, or and there won't be hurdles, and so we absolutely have to remain mindful.
Yeah. By the way, before, I know we're almost out of time, but there is one workshop I will be giving when I come join you that I haven't mentioned yet because it doesn't tie into any of my history stories, but I am going to be giving Mary and Martha Decide to Homeschool. And I just wanted to bring it up because you understand this workshop. You and I have talked so many times about the fact that you're my Martha because I am a Mary. I am a Mary to a fault. And so we've jollied about it over the years. But one of the things I so enjoyed about meeting you is that you came along and you offered me literally like administrative skills and ideas and organization. I think you made spreadsheets for me back in the day when I just wasn't there, because one reason I love history is that I think I am a Mary, and that's all great. But for me to stay organized and to have ever been published is a small miracle. God has to put Marthas in my life to kind of help me. So I just want to encourage women who feel like they're a Mary and a Martha industry, because I think homeschool may attract the Marthas who are like, well, I'm going to do it, and they may do it really well and they've got their lesson plans and all that stuff. But the Mary person is the one who has the heart to do it, truly, but really may struggle. So I have a workshop to laugh through some of that and give some tips and words of encouragement, because if I could survive it, it makes me think anyone can.
I'm glad you brought it up, because I was thinking about that even as I was preparing for our conversation, because that workshop makes me think of us. And it does bring back a lot of memories. And, there's a lot of things that I don't really strive to have a claim to fame, but if I do have a claim to fame, I'm in the acknowledgments of volume 2, I do believe. Of the new version.
That's helping me out. Yeah.
And there's very few pieces of homeschool curriculum that I held on to over the years, other than now. I mean, I've been done homeschooling for, actually, this is now 11 years, but I'm so blessed that I get to stay in the homeschool world. So I have pieces around, but the mystery of history shall never leave my bookshelf.
And for those that don't know Tara personally like I do, she truly is gifted administratively. That's why you're in the position that you are. And I just love seeing it. It's so sweet from my view to see where you've landed. So thank you for your service. It's big.
Back at you, because, to get to know you in the early years when you lived close to me, actually, because you were living here in Ohio. I live in the southeast corner of Indiana. And so we got to spend a lot of time together. And it's been my great privilege to help you along the way and see where God has taken your passions at the same time.
Do you remember you made a workshop for me on a CD?
Yes.
I was nowhere near that place in my life. I was giving workshops all the time, but record it, replicate it. But you helped me do that, which reminds me, I have a gift for your listeners.
Oh, very exciting.
Let me spit that out before I forget. So I just have a little coupon code to share of our latest product, which is kind of out of the blue, but we are taking over the publishing of a King Arthur book. A friend of ours was publishing it. She's handing it over to us because her life's taking her another direction. So we have the Legends of King Arthur. It's a little book, and I recorded it recently in audiobook format, and my husband added music and sound effects, and I'm so thrilled with what he did. He's a whiz at all that, but he added this, clashing of swords when the knights are fighting. And I kind of, as a kid, the only history I liked was the stories of King Arthur. So this has come full circle for me that I got to actually record that. So anyway, you can get 50% off of the King Arthur bundle if you'll type in Tara Rocks, all one word, TARAROCKS, Tara Rocks, because I'm a fan of yours. So anyway, they can get 50% off the bundle if they're interested, because it's a book, a student study guide, a Bible study that's digital, and the audiobook. It's loaded.
Oh, I love that. That's so sweet. Thank you for doing that. It actually brings back another memory. So
what?
I remember working an event with you where this little boy, he was probably 9 or 10 years old. He was so excited to talk to you. And he had a sword. Now, at a homeschool conference, you will very often have those companies that sell like wooden tools, right? Like he was not walking around with a deadly weapon. But he was so excited to come talk to you about history. And he had his little sword. He had his sword. And I love that. I love seeing how you have helped connect kids with the stories of history.
11-year-olds, they're our biggest fans. Something very special happens at that age. So, yeah, there's a lot of little sword-wielding boys
Oh, that's
that
wonderful.
I've connected to over the years. And the girls, too. It's funny, though. The girls are the ones who'll write. They'll write me little notes and say, I didn't like history, but now I do. And that's my mission, is to take anybody that doesn't like history and help them like it. And so
I think you're successfully doing that. So I can't wait to have you back in Indiana. Thank you for being a part of this conversation today and for doing what you're doing. I know we're running out of time here, but I have one final question, because I don't even know if you can answer this. How are you going to know when to end your American history?
Oh, whew. Well, here's what'll happen. Similar to Volume 4, I wrote up to present day at that time, which means Volume 4 goes up to 2014. And then it had a automatic cutoff, and then I had a couple years to get it edited. And so, it only came out a couple years later. So I guess the same thing is going to happen. In my table of contents currently, I've got the last maybe 3 chapters wide open, because who knows what will happen between now and then that truly would make another chapter. So yeah, we shall see. We shall see. I'll leave those wide open. I'll write up, to as current as humanly possible, and then it'll take some time to get it edited and published, and then it'll be out. So we're going. I mean, it's 2025, which is like that number hurts my head. So let's say, I don't know, I could probably get maybe a headline from 2027 or 28 still in there.
Wow.
Maybe not. Maybe 2027. But still, that's 2 years forward.
Fun to think about.
Yeah, I can't tell you what that will be, Tara. It'll be
I don't know what's going to happen next month.
Yeah, I know.
Very unpredictable these days. Well, thank you again. I look forward to seeing you. And till the next time.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tara. God bless.